All right, Bruchim Abayim Lechulam. Welcome everybody to Derech HaYashar Ministries teaching portion of our services today, and we're so glad that you have chosen to join us as we are entering into a new Sefer. Sefer in Hebrew means book. We're entering into a new book this week called Shemot, and we're embarking in a journey through the book of Exodus, also known by its Hebrew name Shemot, which means names. This book explores some of the most significant historical events within the entire Bible, and that is that there's a difficult exile that they experienced within Egypt, and it became a pivotal moment for the Jewish people. They were free in the land, and a famine then caused them to go down into Egypt to buy food, where they come across their brother Joseph that they had sold off into slavery, realizing that he has become the second in command of all of Egypt. And so in order to work it out through the rest of the famine, the brothers came down, the father came down, they lived within the within the land of Egypt. And so the Exodus from the Egypt, when they leave, symbolizes the emergence of the nation of Israel itself. It marks the moment when the Torah was given. Again, the book of Shemot is contained in it, the giving of the Torah, and it's imbued with life and profound meaning and purpose for the Jewish people. Additionally, it highlights the creation of the sanctuary, which facilitated the divine presence within our world. So the book of Shemot is very central to the entire story of exile and redemption. And we can learn many, many lessons from this particular book if we just pay attention as we go through. And in today's teaching, we're going to accentuate the connection between Moses and the Messiah as kind of somewhat of an overview of the book of Shemot, and then we will get into some particulars about how it can apply to our day today. I've said this many a times, if we read the scriptures and we go into the Torah and it has no meaning for today, then it just becomes a historical book full of stories and remembering this and that. But it needs to apply today. And this Torah portion this week is no different. It gives us an insight into some important things that are taking place today. And as we get into it, I'll explain it some more. But the idea is that the exile and the redemption from Egypt is a pattern for the exile that we're in now and the redemption that's going to take place in the future. So we should remember that the descent into Egypt and the eventual end of the Galut is a pattern for the greater Exodus that we're going to experience. And this information is relevant because it parallels Messiah Yeshua, who will lead us out of the Galut. So remember, when we're thinking about Moses, we're actually seeing a picture of the Messiah who's going to rescue his people in the end days. In Judaism, Moses is regarded highly regarded as the first redeemer, because he is the first redeemer. He is the one who brought them out of the first exile. And being labeled as the first redeemer would indicate that there would be another redeemer, a second redeemer that's going to come after him. And it's taught in Judaism that an emanation from Moses is present in every generation to illumine them. How is this accomplished, right? What does it mean that there's an emanation of Moses within every generation? And how does this work? What does this mean? What does it mean that an emanation is present with them? So before we get into that, we are going to do our blessing before our Torah study. Baruch atah, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by your commandments, commanded us to study your Torah. So, how is this emanation of Moses? How is it present in every generation? Well, this is true in the sense, if you look at Acts 15 and verse 21. It says, "For Moses has had throughout many generations those who preach him in every city being read in the synagogues every Sabbath. Okay, for Moses has been throughout many generations, those who preach him in every city, being read in the synagogue of every Sabbath. Why is this relevant? Why is this important? Well, Moses is illumined through the study of the Torah in every generation. The words of Moses, the characteristics of Moses, the way that Moses dealt with his people, and how the people interacted with Moses, all of this has been preserved through generation after generation after generation. If you remember in our liturgy that we do during the Torah service, not Torah service, in the Shacharit prayers, we talk about Lador Vador, from generation to generation. It's going to be passed on, passed on, passed on. So Moses now is in every generation through the words in which we read in the Torah every week as we come together for our services. It keeps his memory and his words alive as we study them. So also with Messiah Yeshua, as he explains in John 15, verses 1 through 8. He says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself. Unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered. And they gather them and they throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. By this, my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and you will be my disciples. Okay, so we see this connection between Moses being read in the synagogue every Shabbat, and we see that Yeshua said, if my words abide in you, and you abide in me. So in every generation from the Messiah, his words have been imbibed within the people from generation to generation as well. We're 2,000 years removed from the events that took place when Yeshua walked the earth. And yet, through the preservation of that word, through the reading of the word, through the study of the word, now we have, returning back to us, the words of Moses. So now we have Moses and Messiah. And we can now form a picture that is going to help us understand the connection between these two. I titled this message, Donkeys, Vines, and Branches. Okay, and we just read in John chapter 15 about being the vine and being the branch. And it's important that we understand like this, for the fact that the catalyst for Messiah Yeshua abiding in us, it is internalizing his word. By internalizing, I mean living them out in daily life. It's not just about knowing the words. Okay, a lot of people who might know the words, but is that word working its way out through their life? So for way too many people, it's about head knowledge. It begins with knowing it, but it doesn't stop there. This was taught in the yeshiva. If our knowledge exceeds our practice, then we are in error. Because what we internalize and understand and know is what we should be doing. There's no sense in knowing about something if we're not going to apply it into our life. It just becomes space that's living rent-free in your head. Okay? This was the message of James, of Yaakov, when he penned these words in James chapter 2, verses 18 through 24. It says, but someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that there is one God. You do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. But do you want to know, O foolish man, that faith without works is dead? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered Isaac his son on the altar? It gives a lot of people a problem. It gives a lot of people a problem. Was not Abraham our father justified by works? Do you see that faith was working together with his works, and by works, faith was made perfect? And the scripture was fulfilled, which says, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him as righteousness, and he was called the friend of God. You see then that a man is justified by works and not by faith only. Okay? I understand faith alone, grace alone. I understand that. But James says if it don't work its way out in your life, it's just head knowledge. That's all it is. So when James says that you're justified by works, he's showing that you already have the faith. He's showing that you've already been justified by grace. And now you're working it out in your life. And that makes all the difference in the world. See, the purpose of the connection to the vine is crucial for redemption. We have to be connected to the vine because the connection guards and keeps us from assimilation into the error of the world. Okay? This is why Moses was read in the synagogue every Shabbat. You go and you would be reminded week after week after week, year after year, decade after decade of the things that we need to remember. In a way, Moses and Messiah are regarded, are connected in this regard. And we're going to backtrack a little bit into the book of Genesis to look at a passage that reveals this connection between Moses and the Messiah. Again, it's about donkeys and vines. So backtracking into Genesis chapter 49, verse 11, it says, binding his donkey to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine and his clothes in the blood of grapes. This is in the context of Jacob giving his blessing to Judah. He talks about donkeys, vines, and colts, and grapes, and clothes, and blood of grapes. Or Chaim, commenting on this verse, he says, perhaps the verse is again speaking about the arrival of the Messiah, who has been mentioned at the end of the last verse when referring to Shiloh. Jacob described that period as one when all the nations of the world will seek out the Messiah. This verse would then describe the Messiah as tying his donkey to the vine, i.e., Israel. Okay? I want us to take a close look at that. He says that the vine is Israel. Israel has been compared to the vine in Psalm 80 and verse 9 that says, you plucked up a vine from Egypt, you expelled nations and planted it. Okay? Psalm 80 verse 9 makes a literal reference to Israel being that vine. The donkey in this verse refers to the Gentile nations. We have several instances in the Bible which the Gentile nations are compared to donkeys. The first such instance is in Genesis 22:5, where Abraham compares the Gentiles to the donkey, according to Kiddushin 68. We also have a very clear such comparison in Ezekiel 23:20. For she lusted for her paramours, whose flesh is like the flesh of donkeys, where the prophet compares Israel's promiscuity with Gentiles as a lust for the flesh of donkeys. Now, looking at this verse from Ezekiel 23, one might get offended. Being a Gentile, going, how dare they say we have the flesh of donkeys? That's what Israel was lusting after. Well, that's not necessarily the point that Ezekiel is trying to make. Let's understand what he's actually saying here. Ezekiel is saying that Israel lusted after the ways of the Gentiles, who were without God and without Torah. If you notice, Israel often assimilated into the nations that they had been around. Whenever any type of nation began to mix with Israel, they began to wander after the ways of the Gentiles. Why? Well, they had parties, right? They had fun. They catered to the flesh. They catered to pleasurable experiences, drinking lots of alcohol, having these rampant orgies, and their gods actually didn't demand anything out of their behavior. So you could just live normally, naturally, how you felt like living. And that's appealing to people. Because the minute you start talking to people about God and about Yeshua or Jesus, the first thing I want to tell you is, I don't want nobody telling me what to do. I don't want anybody to tell me to do. Aldous Huxley, a famous philosopher, said this. He said, I don't want there to be a God. I don't want there to be a God so that I can be free to pursue my own pleasures. He makes that very clear. And anybody who says any different, they're lying. That's the very reason they don't want a God in their life, because they don't want to be tied down to some sort of responsibility and liability for their actions. So whenever Israel got into the arena with the nations, they started lusting after the ways of the Gentiles and falling into idolatry and all kinds of licentiousness. And the nations acted like a chamor. They did. Why do we compare material existence to a chamor, to a donkey? Because a donkey does not have a neshama. It does the same thing that every other animal does. It's called the nefesh behama. It's the animalistic nature within us that propels us to certain behaviors. So to the nations acted like a chamor, a donkey that only operates according to the flesh and not according to the spirit. So this is what Ezekiel was actually saying. So when interpreting the Bible, it's helpful for us to remember that there's several layers of understanding. Sometimes the scriptures, they allude to other things, especially when interpreting something such as a prophecy that we find in Genesis 49:11. Why does the prophecy contain elements such as donkeys, vines, garments, and blood of grapes? Well, these elements are included to give us connections so that we can easily identify when reading the words of the apostolic scriptures. Okay, we make correlations, and this thing corresponds to that thing, and this thing is connected to that thing. As a matter of fact, in the words of Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, he says, everything we know about the world, we know by corresponding one thing to another. We draw parallels or correspondences between those things that we are familiar with and those that we are not. This is especially true when the subjects of our inquiry are the hidden, secret, and concealed aspects of reality. So you've heard me do it. Sometimes I'll be talking about a biblical passage, and then I will make a reference to a movie. Or I've made references to how car engines work or things like that. We make correlations and correspondences so that we can better understand things. The Old Testament, the Tanakh, is the dictionary to the Brit Hadashah. The Old Testament is the dictionary to the New Testament. If you don't understand and know the words and the concepts that are found in the Tanakh in the Old Testament, you're bound and determined to misunderstand and misinterpret the New Testament. Okay? So why is all these words, blood, grapes, vines, donkeys, and colts, and all that stuff in the Old Testament? It's to help us correspond what we read within the Brit Hadashah, within the New Testament. Let's consider this correlation. In Matthew 21, verses 1 through 7. It says, now when they drew near Jerusalem and came to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Yeshua sent 2 disciples, saying to them, go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied, and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them to me. And if anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord has need of them, and immediately he will send them. All this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, tell the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you lowly and sitting on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. So the disciples went and did as Yeshua commanded them. They brought the donkey to the colt, laid their clothes on them, and set him on them. And one of them, Caiaphas, that was the end of that passage. So in this passage, we see that there's colts, donkeys, and Messiah having need of them. We've already established that vines is Israel. Donkeys are the nations, according to Scripture now. However, there's no mention of vines in this passage. We don't see vines in here. We do see the colts and the donkeys and the Messiah coming to him and him riding on these donkey and colt going into into Jerusalem. So how can we make this correlation between Genesis 49:11 and Matthew 21? And that's a fair question. How can we do that? Well, consider that Yeshua is the vine. Okay? I said earlier that Israel is the vine. But we can also say that Yeshua is in fact the vine, because in John 15 he said he was the vine. So if we look in the Psalms and it says that Israel is the vine, and in Yeshua says, "And come, I'm the vine," how is that possible? Well, if the vine is Israel, I've explained in past teachings that Yeshua is Israel and Israel is the Messiah. They're both one and the same. Okay? Why? We explained in past teachings that Moses, if you put him on one side of a scale and put all of Israel on the other side of the scale, it would balance out. If you just took Moses. Why? Because Moses was willing to die for the entire nation because of the sin of the golden calf. He told God, "If you will not forgive them, blot my name out of the book." What book is that? It's the book of life. And so because he was on such a level, a high spiritual level, that he was willing to die, get his name erased out of the book of life on behalf of Israel, that makes him on the same level as Israel. Messiah Yeshua did exactly the same thing, but on a much higher level. Why? Because he's the Savior of the world. His death provides atonement for everybody, not just Israel. And so when we say that Israel is the vine, and then we say Yeshua is the vine, it's the same thing. Because if you put Yeshua on the other side, obviously the scales would tip. Moses, because of Moses and Mesirut Nefesh and his willingness to die to himself, he was willing to give up his own life so that all of Israel would be preserved and not destroyed in the wilderness. One person would die for the entire nation. Then we read in John 11:49 and through 52. John 11:49 through 52. Absolutely amazing. "And one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, 'You know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish.' Now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Yeshua would die for the nation, and not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad." So you notice in that particular passage, it talks about not just Israel, but all of the world. So we put Yeshua, the Messiah, on a higher plane than Moses because he was able to effect salvation for the entire world. So we've learned in the past that the donkey represents the materialistic aspect of reality. Again, the Hebrew word for donkey is chamor, and the word for material matter is chomer. Has the same consonantal letters, the chet, the mem, and the resh. The Messiah riding on the donkey has completely subdued the fleshly nature. He rode upon the chamor, and he completely subdued his entire fleshly nature to the will of his Father. However, we just learned that Orach Chaim said that the donkey represents the nations and materialistic matter. Outside of a religious worldview, there's nothing but a materialistic existence. Outside of a biblical worldview, there is no soul. There is no afterlife. Atheistic people in the world say when you die, that's it. You're done. This earth, that's all there is. Maybe some of you remember the hit song by Madonna in the 1980s, Material Girl, right? The chorus says, "Because we are living in a material world and I am a material girl." Okay? This is the view of the world outside of a biblical worldview. There's no afterlife. Now you have your idolatrous religions in the world. that believe that there could be some sort of afterlife, but not according to the scriptures and not according to God. They have some sort of ethereal, mystical, we don't know what happens. You just assume into this great thing, whatever, and then you're no longer around. Paul explains this point in Ephesians chapter 2 of the worldview of the nations by saying that Gentiles were outside of the covenants and they didn't have God or Messiah in the world. Paul explains this. He says, Gentiles, you guys live a material existence. That doesn't mean that there aren't good people in the world who don't know God. That doesn't mean that. Okay? Everybody was created in the image of God, no matter how much it's covered up with a klippah, with a husk. There is a spark of God in each and every person. It just means that their existence lacks a spiritual understanding. It lacks a spiritual understanding. We read in 1 Corinthians 2, verses 10 through 11. But God has revealed them to us through his Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, yes, the deep things of God. For what man knows the things of a man except the spirit of the man which is in him? Even so, no one knows the things of God except the Spirit of God. In Matthew 21, we see the donkey, i.e. the nations. They're tied up. And they are loosed and they are brought to the Messiah. How are they loosed or untied? Who looses them and unties them? Well, it's the disciples. The disciples went at the word of the Master. Go, untie the nations from what they are tied to. The disciples brought the message to the world and led people to the Messiah. It's ultimately the Messiah who frees people from the bondage. However, there must be a messenger. There must be a messenger who goes and brings them to him. The Messiah is lifted up upon the nations, and it's upon the shoulders of the remnant of the nations that the Messiah is going to be ushered into Jerusalem. Are you guys seeing the picture here? The picture is in the end times that the Messiah is going to be lifted up on the shoulders of the remnant of the nations. And that's why it talks about clearing the highway. Remove the blockades and the stones within the highway. Repair the road and bring the Messiah back to where he belongs, into Jerusalem. Or Chaim says this. He says, when Jacob proceeds to speak of the Sorecha in Genesis 49:11, an especially long vine, as a branch to which the Messiah will tie his she-ass's colt, he makes a fine distinction between the male and female souls that originate in the domain of the Klippah. Then speaking of Israel as a whole, i.e. Geffen, right? You know, Bori, Peri, HaGeffen, the vine. He describes the Messiah as tying the male Gentiles to the whole vine. Whereas when speaking of the female Gentiles, he speaks of the Messiah tying them to a single branch of that vine. We'll explain that. What does he mean by that? He's talking about male Gentiles are going to be tied to the whole vine. We're going to be tied to Israel. And we're going to be tied to the Messiah. This means that Gentiles don't take a seat in the back of the bus. Okay? I call that back of the bus theology. I call that don't drink out of my water fountain theology. The Torah is for everyone. And everything contained in the Torah has benefit for everyone. I did some research this week, and I was a little disappointed about what I read. But they said Gentiles, they can don tefillin if they want to. They can put it on tali if they want to. But it's of no benefit to them because they're not obligated. Hogwash. When you keep the commandments of God, I don't care whether you're Jewish or you're Gentile, there is benefit to it. Why? Because you're obeying the commandments of Hashem. You are bringing down his divine Shifa, his blessing into the world through the keeping of his commandments. Whether you're obligated or not, I'm willing to sit here and say that those who are obligated do it, and it's of no benefit because they have no kavanah. They're doing it according to the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. Okay? So to say that Gentiles don't have that ability to draw down the divine blessing of God through the keeping of his mitzvot, I don't buy it for 1 minute, and I don't think the Apostle Paul bought it for 1 minute, and I don't think Yeshua himself. And I don't think Or Chaim bought it either. He said that the Gentiles will be tied to the whole vine, being Messiah, walking in the ways that Messiah Yeshua walked. The Messiah riding into Jerusalem on a donkey indicates that the Gentiles will be brought to Israel, i.e. the vine, And what will they be done? Be done to them? What happened when he got off and he went into Jerusalem? That donkey was tied again. It was tethered in Jerusalem to Israel. It is through Messiah Yeshua that the Gentiles are brought into the natural tree. Now, that's a lot of introduction into the book of Exodus, but I wanted to give us a bird's eye view of the redemption and understanding the process, which is what the book of Shemot is all about. The book of Shemot is all about redemption. It's all about galut, exile, redemption, Messiah, and all of those things. Moses' birth that we find here in the book of Exodus, his birth brings a light-filled house. He brings light into the world. Everybody knows John 1:1. There was a light that came into the world, and this light was the light of men. And the birth of Moses coming into the world signaled his role as humanity's enlightener. Okay? Moses brought something into the world. He ushered the Torah into the world, which is the revelation of God, the Word of God into the world. However, this light must be concealed immediately. Okay? This light must be concealed immediately as he, like all Hebrew male infants, faced constant danger from Pharaoh's executioners. Okay? The book of Exodus, all of the children were, all the people were commanded to throw the children into the river, at least all the males. And so this light that came into the world had to be concealed. He had to be hidden. Sound familiar? The light of the world came into the world, and his own didn't even recognize him. Why? Because he was concealed. Moses was then set adrift on the Nile, precariously safeguarded by a reed basket, potentially sharing the fate of other babies thrown into its waters. If you look at that basket and understanding that Moses was hidden away with it, we can see that Moses was hidden by a klipa, a shell. Had no idea who he was. When Pharaoh's daughter went out into the water and pulled him back, she didn't know who he was. She didn't recognize him as the Redeemer. Why? Because he was in his infancy. They didn't understand the potential of who he was. Yeshua came to his own. They didn't recognize the potential of the Mashiach who was in their midst and understanding. This episode emphasizes that a leader should not seem distant and superior, but rather experience the same struggles as their people. Okay? Moses was in danger of being killed, and he had to go into this basket and go through, and then for a good part of the rest of his life, experience the trials and tribulations. He went into the palace, and then later on went out to be with his people. So he experienced both worlds, being high and exalted in the palace and being lowly with his people out in the field. God illustrated this by first appearing to Moses in a thorn bush. And God said, I am with them in their affliction. Okay? God is the God of the universe. He's the creator of all things. And yet he chooses to know my name. Chooses to know your name. He chooses to know every hair that's on your head. And God chooses to be with them in everybody's affliction. Hebrews 4, verses 15 through 16. It says, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. So Moses and Messiah, Yeshua, experienced the struggles and sufferings of their people. They both experienced what it was like to be a regular, everyday person. Career politicians who haven't experienced the trials and tribulations of their constituents can't possibly comprehend the people's needs. If they've never lived from paycheck to paycheck, if they've never worked a job, 2 jobs, and struggled to make ends meet, and yet somehow or another seem to think that they know how to fix the country's problems, they're deluding themselves and thinking they're pulling the wool over everybody else's eyes. It irks me to no end to hear a politician who's become a multimillionaire while they're in office pursuing their politics, trying to identify with ordinary people's struggles. It irks me to no end. If you ain't going out and getting you a regular job and not getting kickbacks from all of your lobbyists and all of your corporations and everything else, and your bank account grows and grows and grows, and then try to pretend like you know how to fix the country's problems with everyday workaday people who struggle from paycheck to paycheck, I don't want to hear what you got to say. I just don't. So another parallel in the book of Shemot is in Exodus 1:22. That's going to help us to understand this galut redemption concept that we find. Exodus 1:22. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. What does it mean that the Pharaoh commanded all his people to save alive every daughter? Why the daughters? Why didn't he just have all the children killed? Well, the Hebrew word for you shall save alive is the word techayun. Techayun. It's the very last word in the Hebrew sentence there on your PowerPoint. It comes from the root word chai, which means life. The Hebrew verb chaya primarily means to live or to be alive. It encompasses the ideas of sustaining life, reviving and restoring life. So when he tells the Egyptians, now this is at the end of chapter 21, he's speaking to all the people. He commanded all his people, kill all the boys, but sustain the daughters. What does he mean by sustaining? One might think that Pharaoh was just generous in saving the daughters. However, the wording suggests that it was also a harsh decree. It was a harsh decree. He didn't just save the girls because he has a soft spot for girls and stuff like that. It's not what he was doing. The boys that were tossed in the river, they suffered a physical death. Okay? Pharaoh instructed all of his people to sustain the girls' lives, and sustaining their lives is understood as raising them in Egyptian culture and an education in order to kill their souls. Okay? So when he kept them alive, he wasn't being this beneficent, all-kind humanoid God. He wasn't. He had an agenda in what he was doing. We read in Likutei Sichot. He says, this explains the difference in the orders to the Jewish midwives and the Egyptians, respectively. The Jewish midwives were simply told to leave the girls alone. If it be a girl, vechya, let her live, as opposed to techayun. Pharaoh hoped that this would make it easier for them to carry out his order to kill the boys. The culture of the world is designed to kill the soul and educate children according to the ways of Egypt. Why is it they save the girls alive? Because usually they are the educators of the home. And if you can educate the little girls in the ways of Egyptian culture and understanding, then they know that any future boys or girls born to them will then adhere to that cultural education that they received. To throw the boys into the river entails two implications. One, the physical galut of Egypt, to destroy the Jewish body, but B, the spiritual galut of Egypt, casting Israel into the idolatry and the hedonism of Egypt to destroy their souls. Okay, this was twofold. This is to break them down and then indoctrinate them. That was Egypt's ploy in killing the boys and saving the girls. Solomon was correct. He was absolutely right when he said there's nothing new in the world. People today are playing by the same old playbook. Nothing is different. Likutei Sichot again says the galut of Egypt is the root of all subsequent exiles. Thus it follows that the harsh decrees of the Egyptian galut are prevalent in every subsequent galut, subsequent exile, including our own present one. Today, the playbook hasn't changed. Nothing new under the sun. The Nachash all the way back, the serpent all the way back in Genesis chapter 3. Still playing his same old games today. Same old pattern, same old way. There's a Pharaoh present in the world today. There is a prevailing spirit and pressure of society to throw children into the sea of the customs and practices of their environment today, for these children become immersed and drowned in that sea on the assumption that this would provide their livelihood. What do I mean by that? I mean that in today's world, what are you taught from a small child? Do good in school, go to college, get a degree, get a good job, and then live your life buying all the stuff that you want to do. Follow your dreams, get the house you want, the boat you want, live the life that you want, and it's a materialistic existence. Very, very seldom is it ever about a spiritual background and understanding, educating them on the nature of the Spirit, the nature of our creation, and our relationship to our Creator. The second part of that is to confine children in the walls and the buildings of Ramses. That is, to involve them in those matters that are basic characteristics and pursuits of that society. The walls and buildings of Pithom and Ramses is the walls of our indoctrination centers in this world, in this nation. They're not educating them, they're indoctrinating them. In 1 John 4, verses 2 and 3, Yochanan had an insight way back 2,000 years ago. He said, by this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Yeshua the Messiah has come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that does not confess that Yeshua the Messiah has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the anti-Messiah. It's the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming and is now already in the world. He's saying the spirit already exists. Why? Because there's nothing new under the sun. Every galut is going to have the same properties as the very first galut. So what we can learn from all this is how Pharaoh operates, i.e. the anti-Messiah, what he's doing to indoctrinate people, to change the culture of our children. He even says so much in Exodus 1:10. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them. Haba nit chokhmah lo. Okay, let us deal shrewdly with them, as it says in the English text. Translation, again, smooths out the meaning for you so you don't have to do any work. Isn't that precious? Isn't that precious? The verse should have said, Haba nit chokhmah lahem. It should have said lahem. Lahem is the Hebrew word for them, not lo. What is the Hebrew word lo? Lamed vav. It means him. It means him. Let us deal shrewdly with him. Now you can see why the translators didn't translate it that way, because it wouldn't have made any sense. But looking behind, we peel the veil back, we pull back the curtains. In the end, anti-Messiah is wanting to deal shrewdly with God. And how is he going to do it? He's going to do it through his people. Let us outsmart him, meaning let's outsmart God. The Midrash goes into this understanding of they started rationalizing stuff. So, well, we can't kill him with fire because then God will call down fire on us. But what we can do is he's already judged the world with water. So let's kill them with water. Okay? This is how the Midrash understood that entire thing. Let's outsmart God. He's already judged with water. He's already said he wouldn't do it again. He already said, never again will I judge the world with a flood, with water. So they outsmarted God, at least they thought they outsmarted God, by throwing the children in the water, therefore not bringing judgment upon themselves. The Pharaoh, king of Egypt's sole purpose was to extinguish the Jewish soul from the planet. And that is what is meant by outsmarting him, by outsmarting God. Sound familiar? It should come to mind the words Mein Kampf, the Jewish solution, the final solution. Nothing new in the world. Hitler was a pharaoh. He was a pharaoh. He was a part of the Antichrist spirit in the world. Nothing new. As much as I don't want to say it, but I have to. I have to say it. The greater body of believers in Messiah must reverse the decree of the Council of Nicaea. They must reverse the Council of Nicaea. From an online article from Ron Cantor, He said, for the bishops of Nicaea, who literally boycotted the Jewish participation in the most crucial council, the future of Israel was not even on their radar. This is condemning that the church literally and purposefully turned their back on the Jewish people and abrogated, stole, took away their Messiah. The church must wake up. The church must wake up and realize that they have, on some level, okay, theologically or doctrinally, they have participated in the Pharaoh's decree to submerge children into the river of secular education. They have neglected the pursuit of proper Torah study, interpret the New Testament according to the Jewish foundation, which leaves a vacuum in its wake. I'm not wholesale condemning the church. They've done great deeds. However, on the concept of the Jewish Messiah and the nation of Israel, they have turned their back. They have taken the Jewish children and thrown them into the river. Likutei Sichot again says children must be entrusted only to teachers who are themselves animated by the Torah of life and who follow the principle of, and you shall live by them, i.e. by the mitzvot of the Torah. These teachers, in turn, are to educate the children in the way of life dictated by Torah and mitzvot. This is the only way to save our children, our own children, and through them, the whole of the Jewish nation. You see, the side of evil, the side of the Sitra Achra, knows this principle. The children in this country are being indoctrinated with transgender LGBTQ agendas, and that aim is to destroy the very fabric of society, namely that of the nuclear family, which represents the very concept of a creator in whose image we are created. Why? Because in Genesis chapter 5, we see that Adam and Eve, after the fall of garden, they created a child in their own image, just like Adam and Eve were created in God's image. If you don't think it's in there, check it out. It literally says after the fall of the garden that Adam and Eve created Seth, who was in their own image, in the image of Adam. So this is a picture of our creation by God, and then through our image we beget. A good biblical word there. We beget one another and continue on the line. The whole agenda in educating in these doctrination centers right now is to bring all this in order to wipe out God from the planet. Hello, Pharaoh. We see you're operating today. We know you're here. We know what you're doing. We're not blind to it. The exile in Egypt was the pattern for all subsequent exiles. The redemption from Egypt is also a pattern for the future redemption. So now we see what's going on. Now we need to understand what's coming. Micah 7:15. As in the days when you came out of the land of Egypt, I will show them wonders. This means that the required preparations for the exodus from Egypt will be the same preparations necessary for the future redemption. Whatever takes place within Egypt is exactly what needs to take place today. Needs to take place today. In the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud in Tractate Sotah 11b, Rav Avira taught, in the merit of the righteous women that were in that generation, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. They were redeemed from Egypt. Why? Because they decided that they wouldn't adhere to the decree of Pharaoh. If there is a divine command, it alone must be heeded without calculating possible eventualities. Meaning, don't worry about what's coming down the pipe. You do what God says and let God determine the consequences. By virtue of these righteous women, Israel was freed from Egypt. In America today, one must not pay attention to the liberal agenda that seeks to destroy the minds of our children, but to educate them in the ways of God. I've seen numerous videos of people who are believers in Jesus who are going to school board meetings and putting them on the carpet. putting them on the carpet, calling them about the books that they're putting in their libraries, the agendas that they're bringing into our school system, people are standing up and fighting, and by all means they should. This one guy, he was actually a pastor. They threatened to arrest him, but he said, "You guys are breaking the law, and you think you have the authority to arrest me? You guys are breaking the law by doing the things that you're doing." Now, this may sound harsh. This might sound a little difficult, but the just believe in Jesus mantra won't cut it anymore. Just believe in Jesus for your salvation. Believe in the Messiah is essential. I understand that. Belief in the Messiah is essential, but it can't end there. Belief in the Messiah without the Torah is an empty belief that withers away through time. I've seen it happen time and time again. People will raise their kids in the church. They go into the youth program. They hand them a volleyball and a gaming console. And then they get 5 minutes of some other teenager who doesn't have the experience or the knowledge or the life experience to actually expand on the scriptures, to have some sort of meaningful understanding. They get 5 minutes of that, and the rest of the time they're playing games. Volleyball, basketball, soccer, throwing a football, playing video games. And after that, they're done. And then after a while, this idea of you just believe in Jesus, just believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus died and he was raised and then he went to heaven. And then you just believe that. It has no substance to it. Because belief in Yeshua as the Messiah comes with a responsibility then to walk out his commandments. And his commandments are not his own. He said so in the book of John, chapter 6, chapter 7, something like that. He said, my words are not my own, but his who sent me. And then in 1 John chapter 5, he said that how do you know that you love God? It's when you love those who were begotten by God. I mean, loving your neighbor as yourself. And then you keep the commandments of God. I don't know if you know that's in there. 1 John chapter 5, he literally says, keep the commandments of God. So those who would come to me and say, well, Pastor Lance, Moray Lance, Jesus had a different set of commandments. No, he didn't. If him and his Father are one, then the commandments of Hashem are the commandments of Yeshua. And that's simple, and that's that. A Messiah who is not connected to the Torah and the commandments of God is no Messiah at all. And a belief, it's imperative that you believe in the death, the resurrection, and the ascension of Messiah and the fact he's come back. It's imperative. But what good is it believing it if you don't do something with it? If you don't walk it out? The world is screaming at our children from the top of their lungs. They're screaming with their agendas and their supposed scientific evidence. They're facing an ever-increasing onslaught of agenda-driven ideologies. Is believing in Jesus for salvation alone without the Torah as a blueprint for living out the faith supposed to combat this attack? It doesn't most of the time. Because when I see people confronted on the street, you see it in videos all the time. They confront them about their belief in the Bible and in Yeshua, and then they can't articulate it. They can't refute the supposed scientific evidence. And they can't refute the circular arguments and the straw man arguments that they're being faced with. Why? Because they have no basic foundation known as the Torah. It is precisely by ignoring the Pharaoh's decrees and adhering to the decrees of Hashem contained in the Torah that we will save the children and bring the redemption through the Messiah. This is why it says that the women of Israel were the ones who were responsible for the redemption, because they refused to adhere to the decrees of Pharaoh and continued to educate their children in the one true God. This brings me to my final point. I found a phenomena today in parenting that I can't quite wrap my mind around. I can't quite fathom it. It's called permissive parenting. I don't know if any of you have heard of this. Permissive parenting is defined as a parenting style that emphasizes a child's freedom over responsibility. Permissive parents are often lenient and lax, and they may have few rules or inconsistent rules. Well, the rabbis have got something to say about this. It says, for children and similarly students to turn out the way they should, there is a need for effort, true exertion to achieve that end. Even when children are obedient, or when one's influence is so strong that a simple word to the students is sufficient, one must not think that he has done enough. Even in such cases, one must exert oneself in their education. With this kind of labor, one need not fear the decree of every son to be born you shall throw into the river. For then we shall overcome that decree. And in fact, those very children born and raised under the conditions of this decree will be the very first to recognize God. Educating our children must be done with vigorous intention and purpose. Believe me when I tell you that Pharaoh is relentlessly throwing everything he can at our children in today's indoctrination centers called public education, media, and entertainment. They are throwing everything but the kitchen sink at our children while believers are embracing a passive approach. It's time for us to make our voices heard. Ignore the LGBTQ agendas. Ignore the transgender issues. You should go to your school board meetings and stand up and say, I'm not doing it. I'm not listening to you. If you guys don't change your ways, we're pulling our kids. And what are you going to do? Are you going to fund an empty building? When the Torah enjoins every person to be fruitful and to multiply, this means also in a spiritual sense. Not only do we physically multiply and be fruitful, one should beget spiritual offspring in conjunction with physical offspring. It doesn't end in just one aspect. And it works in relationships of all walks of life: work, friends, family, neighborhoods. So, having said all that, I want to appeal to those who are online. The Derech HaYashar is in a great need for a physical building so that we can accommodate a more significant gathering of people who have families and children, who can come worship Hashem through liturgy and Torah instruction. We need the space so that children can be educated in the Torah and about Messiah Yeshua according to his Jewish foundation, so that when they grow up and are going into these schools, public schools, and going into universities, that they will have such a strong foundation that they won't be able to be turned away from it. That's what we're trying to do. Will you consider partnering with us and prayerfully and financially as we continue to seek a place for our growing congregation, congregational needs? For those who've already contributed to this project, we are absolutely grateful and thankful for what you have done, for your consistent dedication and your partnership to the mission here at Derech HaYashar. We need some more support so that we can get into a place where we can have families coming. And we've got plenty of people here who desire to teach children. They have received over the last year and a half and beyond that, the foundational education that they have needed in order to propagate the Torah and Messiah Yeshua and connect them both together. And that's what we want. We want to make a difference in our community so that we can combat what's going on. And there's greater strength in numbers. So won't you partner with us as we are looking forward to getting into a building? You can go to derechayyashar.org/donate. Announcement this week is we have added also a PayPal account to our website. So if you desire to pay through PayPal, we also have that link as well as our regular donate window. So go to Derech HaYashar today. Make a difference in Washington State, where we are in the heart of liberal land. And we need to make our voices heard. And that only happens when we all speak one voice in Zephaniah 3:9. We're all going to speak in one voice, one language. We can all speak a lot louder. So thank you for joining us today. We are going to do our teaching with our Birkat HaKohanim. So if everyone would stand as we recite the blessing. that God has commanded for us to recite. Yevarechacha Adonai ve'yishmerecha Ya'er Adonai Panav Alecha Vichunecha Yisa Adonai Panav Alecha V'yasem Lecha Shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. B'Shem Sar Shalom, Yeshua Mashiachenu, in the name of the Prince of Peace, Yeshua our Messiah. And we say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Li'trot. See you next Shabbat.